Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey peeps, today we're going to take a look at Mythos Tales from 8th Summit Games. This is a fully cooperative, or solo, if you will, game where you and the other players take control of investigators in the 1920s doing what else? What did every single person in the 1920s do? Run into Cthulhu mythos monsters and stuff. It's not exactly like that. Actually, this game is very heavily based. It's really, I'd even call it an homage to another famous board game that's been around for a very long time and has multiple editions called Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Maybe not multiple editions of that, there's maybe two. And I think there's another expansion or new content for it on the way. But it's very similar to that game. They don't try to hide that in any way. Whereas Sherlock Holmes has you taking control of... I'm not entirely sure. I've had that game sitting on my shelf for years and I haven't played it. But you're either taking control of Sherlock Holmes or just people who are challenging Sherlock Holmes, and you're trying to see how well you can solve some of his famous investigations and cases and see if you can beat him in the time limit. That's basically what's happening here. You and the other players are these investigators, or maybe fledgling investigators, and your tutor named Armitage is challenging you to see how well you can solve these cases that sometimes start off as your typical 1920s, like whodunits, but sort of devolve at a certain point into stuff involving the Cthulhu mythos, hence the name of the game. Now, this is a bit of a weird and difficult review for me for a couple of reasons. One is that the very nature of this game, it's actually a bit like Time Stories in a way, in that once you have played one of these scenarios, it's really difficult for you to ever play it again. You can kind of coach other people through it, but you can't really get the full enjoyment for yourself. And for that reason, I can't show you this game in exhaustive detail because it would spoil some stuff for you. And there's also, doing a full overview of the gameplay isn't really necessary because it's a very simple game. We'll get to that in a moment. There's another reason why this is a difficult one, but that comes more with whether or not I would recommend it. So we're going to get to that near the end of the video. But for starters, let me just show you some of the components in the game, and I'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So first off, you have, this is all that really is. There's a few other things I'm not going to show you, but you get a big investigation book, which with all the different scenarios, like missions that you're going to go on throughout the game. There's 8, and then I think there's another one, which I haven't gone through, which is sort of a Kickstarter thing. Not exclusive Kickstarter, but from the Kickstarter, there was a special prologue mission that's very hard that you're kind of supposed to play after you do all of these, and I haven't done that one. But you go through here, someone's going to read, you only read what you're supposed to at any given time, that kind of stuff. Very similar in that regard to Time Stories. And I know Time Stories is more reason than, say, Sherlock Holmes, but that's my basis because I haven't played Sherlock Holmes. The whole game is that it's very free form in a way, because you and the other players just say, okay, we have this case. Armitage will set you up with the clues in the beginning, like, not clues, but just the story, like, okay, something happened to this person here, maybe it's a murder, an assault, weird goings-ons, I could say that, right? And you need to go find out what's going on. And he'll say, here's what we know. Here's the people involved. Here's your potential allies. The back of the very sparse rulebook, there's actually a list of the people of your allies you can go to for any of the quests, like the person from the library, or an occultist, or that you know, or the chief of police, that kind of thing. So here's what we know. Here's who was involved. Have at it. What are you going to do? And at that point, you and the other players need to decide from round to round, where are we going to go? What encounter are we going to have? And that's very important because you have a very limited amount of time. Armitage says, okay, you should be able to solve this in this many days, and if you can't do it by then, you kind of have failed my test. So you have a tracker where you'll keep track of exactly how much time you have spent during the course of your investigation. It's broken down by morning, afternoon, evening. Every time you travel to a location, you have to move this a tracker down here. If you ever hit where the target tracker is and you haven't completed the investigation by then, you've lost. But every time that you do go to a location, you'll have an encounter there, which it could change depending on where it is. If you go to the police station, every chapter, every case in the book will have different texts that you have to read when you go to a certain location. So if you go to the police station for the first investigation, then you'll read some scripted text. But that scripted text will be different when you go there for a different investigation, of course. But who you might run into will change. You might run into just the beat cop at the front desk. You might run into the investigator himself. They might tell you that, the chief inspector. They might tell you, the inspector is at the diner down the street, that kind of thing. But the whole point that you're trying to do is get leads. Like, go from one location to the next, like, we're trying to investigate the death of this man, so we'll go to the police station. They'll tell me, this is all that we know. But if you want to investigate on your own, there was some weirdness going on with these people from this cult, so maybe you want to go down the street and check there. So then that'll be the next location that you go to. But what's interesting about it is that there could be red herrings, and you're like, this seems really important. And you go there and you're like, it really wasn't. That was a waste of time. And that's kind of how the flow of the game is. And there's also other materials that you can use in the game. Like, for instance, every chapter is associated with a different newspaper article of the day of the start of your investigation. And you can read that and get hints, the Arkham Advertiser, about what's been happening. There might be a main story revolving around the incident you're investigating, but other things there might be nothing. They might be meaningless, or they might actually tie into what you're trying to do. Do you follow those leads or not? Because you don't have a lot of time. And that's one of the decisions that you have to make. You have to take notes in this game. You have to take notes. Now, it comes with an investigative booklet, but you probably shouldn't do that if you plan to ever resell this. And like I said, once you play the game, that's it. So you're better off just keeping your own notes. And by the way, here, I'll show you a couple of things. First off, you have the giant map, which is this is essentially the board of the game, though you don't actually physically do anything with it. You just refer to it during the course of the game to give you a sense of where your bearings are. Because sometimes people in the game will say, like, it's on the north side of the river, but not specifically where. So you're like, okay, what's on the north side of the river? And hand in hand with that, you need to use a directory. The directory is people from the city, places, and they're all number letter coded according to the map. So it does actually, you can play this game solo, but it's much easier when you have multiple people doing multiple chores. Like when we played, it was like, okay, if you're in charge of notes, someone else is in charge of the directory, and I'll read. Or, I didn't actually read, but someone will be in charge of reading. So it's easier to compartmentalize the different tasks. And so that's the game. You're just going from place to place, trying to get as much information as you can, and then when you get to the end, you're going to have... It's not that you... I should rephrase something I said earlier. It's not that you fail an investigation, just like, we didn't succeed at the investigation, now it's done. You have a list of questions, and this is actually very similar to Witness, if you've ever played that, where based on the information you gain during the course of the game, you have to now answer questions. The better you answer the questions, the higher your score is going to be. Because it's a Cthulhu game, sometimes sanity comes into play, which in this case is just, or in most cases is, did you run into this thing? Did you go here when you really weren't supposed to? You're going to take a sanity hit, which is lack of points, or loss of points, or you don't get as many points for a certain thing as you would have if you had not stuck your nose where it didn't belong, which is a very interesting part of the game. So it's very free form in that regard, and you don't have to win a case to go on to the next one. And sometimes stuff will carry over from case to case. Like, did you do really well here? Well, then this is going to happen, and it might actually penalize you for doing so well. But if you did really poorly, you might get a little bit of a boost for the next one, and sometimes it's just thematic things that you gain. Okay, so let's talk about that's basically how the game is. So what's my opinion of it? Well, we still have to talk about the reason why I might not recommend this game. But based on the gameplay, I would highly recommend this game. I really enjoyed this, and it's desperately making me want to play Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, which is not to take anything away from this game, but I'm actually a little bit Cthulhu fatigued, and I wonder if I'll have a better experience, even better experience, with the Sherlock Holmes game. I just love... Look, I have been one of the vocal people who complains about a game that does not have enough structure. And I can certainly see that criticism being aimed at any game that is like this. And yet, I think there is enough here. You and the other players have very definitive things that you can do. It is an investigation, and you feel like you're making progress the whole time. It doesn't feel like you're just ambling about meaninglessly, unless, of course, you're screwing up the investigation and don't have any leads. But then again, that feels like you have messed up and you have made a mistake. It definitely feels like you are doing something substantial in this game, despite how it's essentially, and in some ways, a role-playing experience. Now, one of the faults I have with the game is that, and this is something that if you have played a lot of actual role-playing games, or if you've played a lot of modern video games that have a lot of choices in dialogue and how you react to characters like Mass Effect games, or especially the recent Fallout games, you might feel a little boxed in when you read a script from one of the locations and you're like, wait a minute though, I wanted to ask him this and this and this, and why didn't he tell us about this? And you're like, let's talk to him about that. Well, no, I can't, because this is just what it told me to read. That's all they're going to tell me. So that feels a little constricted, but you have to remember, it's a board game. It's not a role-playing game. And in that regard, the theme is very, very strong. Strong enough, I think. It is a bummer that you can't... Oh, by the way, I didn't even show you one other component, which I thought was a neat thing. And this isn't used in necessarily every scenario, but you have requirement cards. This is another way that it's actually close to time stories. In time stories, if you get a certain thing in the game that might allow you access to another area, abstractly, it's represented by a colored token with maybe a different geometric shape on it. That's what the numbered cards represent. Oh, you have the key. Well, take the 7 card, and now you can use that wherever a place needs a 7. But anyways, so the theme is very strong in those types of things, and it feels like you're playing a real game in addition to an experience of a game. But yes, it is a bummer that, like Time Stories, once you've played through it, maybe with enough time behind you, you can forget some of the things, but that's kind of a weird thing. It really is a one and done for the most part. But it's such a great experience that I would recommend it highly. It's just so much fun and just a unique thing, and it's cooperative, and I love that. And just everything about the flavor of it, despite, yes, Cthulhu, blah, again, is great. Here's why I might not recommend it. And this is a tough one for me. And where do you draw the line? This game has a lot of mistakes. Printing errors and typography errors and things in the rulebook right from the get-go. This is the first printing of the game. They haven't done a second printing, and there's been no announcement of another one. And in some cases, it's a minor annoyance. In the first scenario, we wanted to go to a place and we're like, it's not even on the map. I guess we just can't go there. Well, no, it was supposed to be on the map. There's an entry for it in the book. In other scenarios, supposedly, I haven't gotten to that point yet, it actually breaks the scenario because they left out something, or something's wrong, or there's a wrong number, or something's wrong on the map. And these are pretty big deals, enough that there's like a 6-page errata fact on Board Game Geek from one of the co-designers. What's most distressing about this is that the publisher has not addressed it at all. From what I can tell, I've looked on the Kickstarter updates. I didn't back this on Kickstarter, so I didn't know anything about any of this until I encountered the problems for myself. Some of the problems. And there doesn't seem to be any updates about it. No news. The co-designers are kind of like doing it on their own. No news of fixing it because, of course, they don't want to pay for, a big, heavy rule book that's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars to replace because they barely... maybe they didn't barely fund, but they didn't make a lot of money with the Kickstarter. So I think they're trying to stay mum for that reason, so they don't have to replace anything and just act like, didn't happen. Everything's fine. There's a fact. Go ahead, use that. But it is pretty annoying, and I wish they would at least come out and say, I'm sorry, we made a mistake, we'll never let it happen again, the second printing will be better. Maybe we'll give you 8th Summit bucks for their 8th Summit store to make up for it. I don't care that much, but it makes me think, like, should you buy the game for this printing? Should you wait for the next one? You probably should. Should you support a company that acts like this? Supposedly, I don't remember, I backed Run, Fight, or Die, one of their other games, and that had some issues and that weren't really addressed that well. Supposedly, there's still people who haven't received their Kickstarter copy of this game, even though it's been out at retail for months. And there were other fulfillment issues with some of their other Kickstarters, and so it's a weird area to be in. Like, I want to tell you the game is great, because it is. I just don't know if you should get it. play someone else's copy who already made the choice. So it's a bit odd. I don't know. I'd be curious to know what other people think about that. But as a game, as the game itself, free from all that meta stuff around it, it's great. And it makes me want to play other games like it, like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, the original. That is Mythos Tales from 8th Summit. I kind of sort of recommend it.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.